Morning, everybody. Those of you that were in the session with Mark Rowland earlier really sort of challenged us around equality and equity. I thought it was just a brilliant session. I echo the comments about listening to Mark, regularly, weekly, to remind us of our sort of real mission to deliver for disadvantaged students. I'm Steve Whittle. I'm one of the senior partners. I'm a secondary colleague joining what is a session delivered by primary colleagues, but I think it's going to be really, really interesting for all of us, and I'm going to find it equally interesting from the perspective of supporting disadvantaged students really early on. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jenny Fraser and Lyndsey Robertson-Forge, and I'm reading my notes, apologies if I do that. Lyndsey and Jenny are joining us from Lancot Primary School, which is in Dunstable. It's a school situated in an area of moderate social deprivation. It's been shared with me, the school's mission statement is to embrace challenge and expect excellence. And again, it's what we expect that supports all students to achieve and thrive. The head teacher, Claire, is the hub manager for the Challenger Hub, which is in the Essex and Bedfordshire region, and the school and hub does a significant amount of outreach work. So Jenny and Lyndsey are going to explore the difference between equity of provision and equality of provision, and the need for both across a primary school setting. Before I hand over to them, both Jenny and Lyndsey, I think Alice will share some housekeeping slides. So this is a 40-minute session. I know Jenny and Lyndsey want to open up to questions towards the end. If you can come show your faces, that'd be lovely, I think, for our presenters. Again, if you can just rename so that colleagues know our schools, and I'll do the same since I've reconnected. Please mute throughout the session, and the session is being recorded. So if you're uncomfortable with that, then please be aware of that. So if there aren't any questions, Jenny and Lyndsey, really warm welcome. Thanks for being willing to share your expertise in this masterclass.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having us. Right, Lyndsey, over to you.
Okay, so my name is Lyndsey Robertson-Forge. I've worked at Lancot for the last 18 years. I currently run the local authority provision for children with social, emotional and mental health needs. So all of the children have an educational healthcare plan. Some are very disadvantaged through SEND, but some obviously because of socio-economic as well. I'm also the safeguarding lead, and I oversee the pupil premium. I have 2 daughters, 2 cats, a dog and a tortoise. And actually when I was doing this slide, I did realise I missed my husband off. So that wasn't a deliberate, but I also have a husband as well. So just before going on to the kind of our journey, I wanted to talk about my passion for ensuring equity of provision, and it stems very much from a personal background. My mum was one of 7 children. She grew up in inner city Glasgow. There was massive deprivation in the kind of local community, but also within her own household. Her mum was a single parent, and in those days, so my mum's 67, so being a single parent with 7 children in those days was particularly difficult. They had children's services involved quite a lot, but very loose involvement, because actually children's services didn't really know what to do to support families in those days. My mum explains her life at school as being really able, but never having an opportunity. She had lots of time off sick because she had to look after her siblings. She was always dripping in head lice. She couldn't get the blazer that was really, really important, especially when you went to a Catholic school. It was very, all about, in those days, it had to be about presentation. So there were so many disadvantage. But the one thing that my mum has always kind of relayed to me and my other siblings is that the one thing her mum was able to give her was aspiration and determination. And all 7 children have gone on to have amazing careers, happy lives. And actually they did that because they genuinely had a belief from a very young age that they could do anything. And I think without having that belief, life for them could have been very, very different. So yeah, that's just my little bit of background.
Mine's a little bit shorter. My name's Jenny Fraser. I'm head of school here at Lancot and currently oversee teaching and learning, and I've been here since 2014. I have the 2 boys, but no cats, dogs or tortoises. Here just to support Lyndsey, who will happily talk equality and equity all day. Very much an expert in the field. So there's going to be quite a lot of information to take in. So we very much hope you enjoy the session. This is something I've decided to leave this slide in. Not necessarily going to do it now, but it's something that we've done on previous training sessions because it really demonstrates the power of words. It leaves people feeling very empowered. What we would ask them to do is text 3 people from a contact list to message back with words to describe you. You can do it now if you want to, because as I said, it leaves you with feeling very positive, empowered and happy as you go through training sessions. If you haven't done it before and you've got an inset coming up, would very much recommend you start with something like this. But what I'm going to move on to is just give you a little bit of context and background about our school and our journey so far. So we are currently a good school and very much working our way steadily onwards. In 2020, we received our 2nd area of excellence from Challenge Partners at the QAR, our first of which was for curriculum design the year before, and then subsequently equity and equality. And we were deemed a leading school in all areas at that QAR. This was then upheld this year. We continued to be leading, and the sessions focus very much on our catch-up provision and our online provision throughout the year. It's taken a huge journey of transformation to reach this point, and we recognise that we're still very much on that journey and still striving forward. But the thing that we found that's made a massive difference now more than ever is having that shared understanding with staff and pupils and our families of the difference between equality and equity and the need for that understanding of both, particularly when we're looking at the various provisions that we have for catch-up. It's such a prominent thing, and it's made a real difference to our kind of ethos and culture as we've moved forward, which is why we're absolutely thrilled to be able to talk to you about it today. I'll pass over to Lyndsey.
Okay, so, as Jenny's just said, the starting point for us was about people's understanding. I'm not going to lie, sometimes I got frustrated if people didn't have the same mindset with me that were working with the disadvantaged children. I could not see why there would ever be a problem for one child in your class not having to pay for a trip because economically they couldn't afford to. But actually, rather than getting angry with people, I had to kind of try and get their perception on this. So it was a massive learning curve for me. And I genuinely believe that when people understand, they get it. So for us as SLT, it was about getting that perception across to staff, children, parents, everybody in our school about, working very transparently about what we do and why we do it. So we started with staff inset days, and we had lots of CPD opportunities around this. We started talking about childhood poverty, what this looks like and feels like. We talked about, how much equity do we have in classrooms currently? What do we do at school that could maybe be a barrier for this? And I think this image actually should be, well, it is in a lot of our classrooms, and I think this speaks 1,000 words. I actually showed it to my husband last night, and he said, "Oh, I don't understand all of that, Linz." And I said, "Well, what do you make from this picture?" And actually, he didn't need to read the blurb. He just absolutely knew what point we were trying to get across. So I'm not going to go into, the definitions of both because it's clear from the picture, but it isn't on the slide if you need to have a little look. So the next thing was, okay, so we've got the staff on board. How do we teach this to the children? Because actually it's such an abstract concept, but actually if we don't get the children on board with this, it's never going to work. It needs to be embedded. We did have a little video of a teacher actually doing this to show you, but obviously time was strict and it's a whistle-stop tour really. So I am going to talk about it. We had what we called the green plaster activity, and it's just elastoplast that you'd put on a cut or something. And we trialled this from our reception to year 6, and actually it was phenomenal. It's one of the best lessons you could ever watch. And it's basically through role play. So we give the children little pretend ailments. So one child would have a sore finger, One child would have a headache, one child would have a broken leg, one child would be depressed. You know, they all had something wrong with them. And what we did was they had to come up the front and tell the doctor, you know, this is the reception, what was wrong with them. And then the first child had to be the child with the sore finger. So you put the plaster on the sore finger and you say, okay, I hope you get better soon. The next child comes up with a headache, but you put the plaster on the sore finger because that's equality. Everybody needs to have the same. And honestly, it's like chaos, isn't it? Especially in the 4+. They couldn't get their frustration and their anger. You know, it was they could see the massive sense of injustice and actually how a plaster on everybody's finger isn't actually helping anybody apart from the person with the sore finger. And that was a really powerful lesson for us. And actually, please feel free if anybody has anything different from that, because that's our kind of go-to activity. And I think we need to think of a little bit more creative ways of doing it now so that we don't become complacent and bored. So if anybody else has ideas, please feel free to share, because this is the beauty of this, really, isn't it, that we can do that.
I remember having a conversation with Lyndsey at the time of teaching it, because I've had the pleasure of teaching it to reception and year 6, so I've seen kind of the either ends of the spectrum. And Lyndsey's advice was to teach it exactly the same way to both, and me naturally as the teacher, but I need to have that sense of progression. I need some sort of scaffold, or I need something that shows that there's differentiation there. But she was adamant. So you said to me, didn't you, just do it exactly the same, because the links that the children will make and the dialogue that you all have will be the natural progression. And actually what the year 6s took from it was far more sophisticated in how it linked their own experiences, but for both age ranges it was completely powerful in getting that notion of what equity actually means.
And you know what, even as an adult, I think that simple kind of activity really stuck with you. You know, it doesn't have to be all singing or dancing, really complicated technical vocab. Something, if you want something to stick, sometimes the most simplest things are the most powerful. So I certainly would use it in a secondary school as well. In fact, maybe secondary school students come up with another activity for us to do on how to teach equality and equity. That would be good, Stephen. Okay, so the next part of our journey, once we felt perception had changed and there'd been a big shift in mindset, was to assess our disadvantaged children, but also to provide provision that would demolish the attainment gap. We were not a school that wanted to prioritise maths and English, and we were really, really key on all areas of learning. So I'm not sure if you've heard of the APGAR. The APGAR in the medical sense is used when a baby is born, and it's a quick assessment by the midwife to using 5 key indicators to determine whether a child is likely to thrive in the first year of life. So the medical term looks at breathing, colour, heart rate and reflexes. So we have, this has been parts of their courses that we did through the RADI and things like that. But what we did was we devised a model that identified 5 key areas of what we thought contributed to successful lifelong learning. So life beyond Lancot, you know, we do not just think we need to get them to year 6. We are already thinking of what about study skills when they're doing the GCSEs. What about the next thing and the next thing? So the 5 key areas that we did very collaboratively with our staff, they're on there, you know, so you've got your maths and English, which is a must. Contribution to school, you know, that does so much for your confidence, your self-esteem, that affiliation, which is really important. General knowledge and cultural capital. We know that a lot of our disadvantaged children do not have the same experiences that our non-disadvantaged children have. Communication skills, absolutely key for when you're older and you go to an interview and you want to get the job. And wider friendship groups, because let's face it, relationships are at the heart of absolutely everything that we do. And it also ensured that we were not, as I said, just prioritising the academic gaps. So this again is something that we do. You might want to devise something differently, and this is it's an assessment tool, but we are not wanting our staff to drown in paperwork. You know, we have enough to do, and I think if you're drowning in paperwork, it just becomes another task that you leave to the last minute, and you don't really engage in why you're doing it. So we wanted something that made it really, really quick. So basically, what this is a quick assessment of a child based on your gut instinct. I'm going back 18 years where you use gut instinct for everything. But actually it is a gut instinct, and it's where do I think this child is now? Not based on anybody else's perception. Where do we think they are against these 5 indicators? So we do it in the autumn term. So the black line would be the autumn term. The red line could be your spring, and then you could do one for the summer. I love a bit of colour coding, but again, that would be down to you. So the adult completing this for the child uses their gut instinct, as I've said. And the nearer to the middle of the graph shows that, sorry, I'm just reading. So the nearer to the middle, the more significant the need. You might be able to come up with something, more technical than that, really. But you can see that the black dot, the child is struggling in certain areas, and actually the red dot shows that they have actually moved on. So basically, a child who is flourishing in all 5 areas will present with a graph that is square or rectangular in shape. And again, this is just something that it's quite difficult to explain because it's something that we use every day. So trying to kind of get you to see how it works can be tricky. And then you just update this as the time goes on. So where we would look at provision, so if I look at this child, I can see contribution to school really is pretty poor. So we need to now put in provision so that child has more of a contribution to school. So, we run a school bank. It could be that we would try and encourage that child to apply for a role in the bank. We have assembly monitors. We have so many pupil roles that would be hopefully put on a plan for that child. What's really important at this point is to make clear that we don't lower the barrier for our disadvantaged students. So if they were applying for a job, they would have to have a really good application form. They'd have to have a good interview. But actually what we would do, the equity, is that we would prepare them for that. We would teach the skills needed to do that, because it's really important that we don't lower that barrier, because actually that's just fake. And when they get out into the world of work or life beyond Lancot, they're actually not going to have the success that we wanted them to have. And actually, I think we all know that, yourself when it's fake and praise and things aren't genuine. And I think you have to work at things for it to be of value. So that's what I would say about that point. I think we probably will have to come back to that because I'm not sure how clear I did actually make that. The APGAR feeds into provision map, as I said, but it's also a massive part of our pupil progress meetings. So yeah, the provision options. So what we also realised when we were having pupil progress meetings, as SLT, we did identify that there wasn't equity across classrooms. And I'm a great believer that's not there because people don't care. I always believe it's because it's a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. So our next port of call was to make everybody aware of what provision is on offer. So that's about in-house provision, external provision. I've been involved in SEND for 18 years, so I'm quite aware of what happens in our local area with SEND, but actually somebody that's been an early years teacher or only been at the school for 2 years is not going to have that wealth of knowledge. And I think it's about really sharing what we all know. This updates, it updates yearly actually, but we could update it earlier if needed. Already we've got things to add on there. We've got a mental health nurse actually from CAMS who works at our school. We're part of a pilot project for CAMS and she's in with us every Thursday. So next year on the provision map for SEMH will be Ashley, our CAMS worker. We also took part in Fearless Queens, which was an intervention for our Year 5 girls, confidence boosting and things like that. Again, that will be put on there. And this is done, all of the teachers get involved, anybody can get involved in this, but we'll also put things in there like a coat exchange. We do a weekly food bank at Lancot, that is all part of provision. And actually that could go onto a provision map. If a child's hungry or, there's extreme disadvantage, then actually we need to make sure that that provision is put in place for that child. The provision map, I think, has really, really brought to the surface what is out there, and it's actually made me as a leader as well try and kind of put onto paper what I know in my head, because sometimes you think everybody knows what you know and that isn't the case. but we also use it to determine whether provision will be used again the following year. So Fearless Queens, we've yet to kind of look into that and have that more in-depth discussion. We're looking at other provision. Jen, what's the other thing we're looking at? The fitness.
Oh,
Commando Jaws. You know, there's all of this that will constantly be updated, but there are things that just stay the same. You can have say by this about levels of engagement increasing through child-led learning. Again, that might be something, you know, that is alternative. That's in addition to what we would do. We've got nurture group, arrival time adjustments. I think a lot of what we do for our disadvantaged children can kind of go missed. You can miss it off provision because actually there's so much, and I would still say we are doing more than even we show on our Accelerate board. But again, it's just making sure that we are all thinking about what is.
And I think the important thing that we've also got in place now is that it's all very much part of a cycle. So when it comes to that point in the year, throughout the year where we want to go and look at the outcomes data for pupils, we will triangulate using the APGAR information and reflect back over provision maps. So it's all brought together to feed into those final assessments for pupils, and then we go back to the APGAR and look at, okay, so there's still a little bit of a attainment gap within writing. Let's have a look at their communication across the APGAR. What provision can we put in place? How much progress of, you know, how much qualitative information and quantitative information do we have about this pupil's ability to communicate in verbally and in writing? And it all feeds in together just so that we've got a really robust system. And it's making a difference.
Okay. So yeah, and then we have an Accelerate board. Again, this is a board in the staff room. All of the children who are on our pupil premium list actually have a picture up on the board. We do have it padlocked, a security to get in, so it is GDPR safe. And actually, I was really keen to have that because I want to know all of the children in the school or recognise them. I don't want to work from a list. You know, these children are more than just names on a list. And again, my little bit of provision that I do daily could just be, you know, I will go out of my way to say, oh, hi, how's things? How are you doing? That kind of thing. And that's just on its most basic level. But we track everything that we do. I will actually show you the next part. This shows that no child is actually missed. This is just an example of what we do. It actually makes people quite competitive as well, which I wouldn't say is a bad thing, because actually it's very clear the children that aren't having different provisions put in place. Our Year 6 staff are particularly competitive, but that's healthy competition and it works. And actually, it also we use different coloured post-it notes. So, you know, if we use a yellow post-it note, sometimes that's for the autumn, and you can see termly what's been put in place. We track what after school clubs they're accessing. The children that haven't accessed after school clubs, so moving to next year, we are going to do a pupil survey. We are actually going to just send it to the children that aren't engaging in after school clubs and ask them what they want, and we will try and put that on. We put absolutely everything on there, any booster groups that they do, if they've had a food hamper. It just gives the whole picture really of the child. And I think it's just really important for the whole school to be aware, because actually these children aren't just the responsibility of the pupil premium lead, it's whole school, you know. And I always think of the phrase, it takes a whole village to raise a child, and actually everybody needs to be aware of our most disadvantaged and what these children are getting.
And I think the power of this is that, I mean, we've actually got it positioned behind our photocopier, so for a large percentage of the day you can't help but stand and stare at it, but it means that there are no children kind of going off the radar. So you know, I can stand there and see straight away. My question would be, I can see a pupil who's one of our Year 2 pupils that hasn't got any post-its, so I would be able to really quickly just and it wouldn't necessarily have to be me, it would be anybody, because it's a shared accountability to say, oh, you know, such and such isn't accessing X, Y, or Z, but I think this might be of benefit. Did you know that this provision is available? So it just means that dialogue is continuous, and it just means that there aren't any children that are being missed.
And we have underneath the Accelerate board is where we put the Lancot provision menu. So it's actually side by side. But you do have a lot of chats. A lot of our kind of professional dialogue happens at the photocopier, and actually quite often it is about this. It's really nice to see, to be honest. So what we know is that children from disadvantaged backgrounds often don't have higher aspirations. And as Karl Marx said, environment determines consciousness. Now, whether you believe in that or not, but I do believe that actually quite often your environment can determine, you know, what happens to you or how difficult life can be. So our next thought was, how do we actually measure what we're doing is actually having an impact, is making a difference? We know that 2/3 of children base their early career aspirations solely on people they know. For many reasons, children from disadvantaged backgrounds are likely to have fewer opportunities to meet people in a range of jobs. You know, me and Jenny spoke about this before we did the training, and actually our children are so lucky. You know, the range of people from different jobs that our children just naturally would meet and take for granted, I would imagine. You know, you sit around the table, somebody works in a barber, somebody works in a supermarket, somebody does this, that, and the other. You know, they have a real range of career kind of awareness from the moment they're born. So what this means for disadvantaged children is that their horizons are already narrowed at a very early age. And again, there's another kind of, it's unfair. So the DfE stated in its 2015 statutory guidance about modern careers that actually it's as much about inspiration and aspiration as it is about advice. You could give as much advice as you wanted to. It could be the best advice known to man, but if the children don't have that inspiration or that aspiration, it's almost falling on deaf ears. So you need the inspiration, and the aspiration is key. And that's where we came up to our next stumbling block kind of thing. What do we do to raise the aspirations, to inspire the next workforce, really? And this is where we were having another bit of a laugh about this. I am a bit, you know, I do enjoy reading up on things, especially about disadvantaged students. And I came across, you might very well be aware, so I won't go too much on about it. But this was a landmark report based on an international survey. It was undertaken in partnership with TESS, the National Association of Head Teachers, and the Institute of Education. And basically it was a survey, international survey, that asked primary school children from the ages of 7 to 11 to draw a picture of the job they wanted to do when they grew up. And this was to determine basically what factors were influencing career choices. The survey also personally asked them if they knew anybody who did this job, if not, how they knew about this job, and also what their favourite subject was at school. Now, we're going to take this even further because it is actually showing us massive gender stereotypes. So I know that last week it was International Women in Engineering Day and things like that. And I think this really gives you a baseline of what children's perceptions are about careers as well. So this was one of my children in the unit, and actually this was 2 years ago, and I actually rag rated it. So the green star was for SEND and the red was for having been disadvantaged as well. So this is a SEND and disadvantaged student who also has an educational healthcare plan, and there has also been quite a lot of involvement with children's services. And actually it broke my heart, to be honest, the first time we sat down, and this was a very articulate child who would talk for England, you know, especially on a one-on-one situation. And this was as good as it got, you know. He honestly didn't know what his favourite subject was. And I have to take that on the chin. You know, I'm his teacher. I had to go with that. And what he wanted to do when he was older, well, you can see the job was a policeman. Actually, in terms of somebody who'd influenced him, he'd had a lot of involvement with the police. So I absolutely understood that. Draw how you know about the job, probably too painful, couldn't access that. And then draw your future. There was absolutely nothing. So I did this the year later. And this, I think, again, this shows the same child, same disadvantage. And actually, he really liked PE, which I can't take any credit for because I don't teach that. Really loved ICT. But the most amazing thing for us when we sat and looked at that, he wants to be an ICT consultant. He wants to work in computers. But actually, the person he's put, hi, I'm Liam, the ICT man. Actually, our ICT from chat is Liam. And actually I took that to Liam to show him actually he'd already inspired somebody to be him. And actually, you know, it's not about going from a policeman to an ICT technician. It's that actually we have done something within our curriculum and actually with relationships within the staff to kind of inspire this child to want to do something else. Again, this is another child from the unit, Send, and his favourite lesson is maths. And actually we're on to our third cycle of Draw the Future and it's still maths. So I need to be very aware now that, you know, we need to try and expose him to what careers are kind of maths based so that he has a purpose for this. And actually, if it's something he's loved all this time, that's probably a job that's going to make him really happy. Because happiness is so important as well. Let's not forget that. So yeah, and his 1 year later, again, it's still maths. We were doing a big topic on diversity, and we were talking about the film and the book Hidden Figures about the ladies, and it was absolutely brilliant. And actually his future now is he wants to make a whole new civilization on the moon. Well, at least it's aspirational. This child is also ASD, but actually I just love the fact that learning had really inspired him to want to do something. And who knows, he might be the next, you know, Richard Branson who gets a shuttle to the moon. Who knows?
And this, from when Lyndsey introduced this, it was a real eye-opener for us and gave us a real kind of a point to drive it forward when we did the first round. And we could see that actually there was quite a lack of aspiration with particular key groups across the school. So it helped us to really reflect on opportunities within our curriculum as to how we can promote that. So an industry tracker was introduced so that we could keep track of the different occupations and careers that pupils were being introduced to as part of their curriculum studies throughout the year, just to make sure that we had a really diverse range year on year. So it's had a really positive impact across the whole school, because now we know that as a minimum of 6 different careers are looked at in depth per year. So by the time pupils join us in nursery all the way up to year 6, that's a vast amount of exposure to those different industries.
Yeah, and where I would like to take this first next is, you know, you have to see it to be it. And actually, I think especially with primary age children, you know, it's all right having people on the television or famous people. I think we need to start with our local community. So I would really like to kind of have a display of different parents, carers, aunties, uncles, and what jobs they do, so that it makes it more real for them, you know. David's mum is a nurse. Let's have a picture of her and say, this is David's mum, this is what she does. Or, you know, let's have a list of subjects that she really enjoyed at school that led her to this kind of career. And I think that's where we want to be going next. So pictures of people within our school community that do a variety of jobs, really, because our disadvantaged children might not be having access to those people in their day-to-day lives that our kind of non-disadvantaged do.
And realise that it is very much attainable, and how that would be attainable.
Yeah, and another way is obviously looking at the gender stereotypes, but I think I also want to at some point look at a comparison. Is there a difference between our non-disadvantaged and our disadvantaged, and what is that difference? What kind of jobs are our disadvantaged children kind of steering towards? Primary Futures is another tool that you could use to try and find people to help you with this, and it's basically a bank of volunteers, and they match you up with volunteers in your area that could actually support with this. Yeah. So again, I'm just going to kind of summarize. I'm not really sure what we're like for time. Are we doing okay? So the school bank, again, you know, we were really keen on about teaching children about financial management. We know that debt is a massive problem in society. We wanted to give children some basic skills, you know, trying to save a little bit of money, regardless of how much that is. You know, if it's 2 pence a week, save it if you can. You know, trying to give really good behaviours really from an early age. This is in collaboration with Credit Union. We've had this now for 5 years. It took 18 months to set up. It was done in consultation with parents. I was very keen that it would be the Credit Union, because actually it's all about community. and it's a non-profit organisation, which I felt was really important. And the children run the bank. We haven't been able to do it during COVID, which absolutely breaks my heart. We couldn't think of an online way, but as soon as we can, we will go back to this. And the children have their passbooks. They have to apply for a job in the bank. There's so many skills. They have to do the application, they have an interview, and actually Trish, who does the interview, it's a very tough interview process. She might have to ease up slightly. And they run it, confidentiality. One of the first things was a child saying, oh, David's got £4.85 in his bank. So there's so much learning that actually you can't discuss that. And we have incentives for children to save. It's just lovely. We have children who save up in year 2 because they want a big trip at the end of year 6. Where we're moving forward is to try and get the credit union to support us with Christmas saving schemes for parents. That might stop the Provident loans and things like that. So that's where we are looking at next. Our next thing that we did actually start prior to COVID, but actually we had to put on hold, was again the notion of lifelong learning. And I think even life beyond Lancot, when the children go to secondary school, how do children know how to study? How do they know how to revise? Do they have a workplace that's actually calm? Do they have a desk? Do they have a room where they can sit and study? Do they have Wi-Fi? You'll all know that was a massive barrier for a lot of our disadvantage, the digital divide. And what we wanted to do was actually incorporate this. So we set up an after school club every week, and we would go on the minibus to our local library and actually give children the confidence to access. It's a great resource that we have in our community as long as we keep them. There's free Wi-Fi, they're calm, it's a lovely place to learn, and actually hopefully get the stigma away from going to a library. I was talking to Stephen before we started. Libraries can be quite intimidating places. I struggle in the library because you've got to be quiet. I'm always worried I'm going to walk in and knock something over and everybody's going to look at me. And if we can kind of get the children from an early age really comfortable in that space, let them own that space. It's a community space. I think moving forward in terms of study skills and all of that, I think that would be a massive thing for our disadvantage. We do a weekly food bank. Our children are involved in running that because we're all about community involvement and engagement. Again, that's a little bit of preparation perhaps for the Duke of Edinburgh Award, because I know the bronze is all about, voluntary work. So we start that in our school. Next year, it's our upper key stage 2 children that will be running that for me. I also think reach out to your local community. People really want to help. I'm constantly badgering people on Twitter and Facebook, can you help us? We have a local market fruit and veg man who now delivers anything excess on a Monday so that we can put it on our food bank on a Tuesday.
Lyndsey, sorry, just to give you a 2-minute warning before
lovely.
Is that all right?
Yeah, we did a winter coat exchange because we were really concerned that some children just didn't have coats. Actually, it wasn't just our disadvantaged children, all families accessed that because the shops were shut. You couldn't really buy online, especially if you didn't have a credit card or a bank card. A lot of people still use cash, and cash is a cashless system now. So we had about 140 coats, and I took coats for my children. Jenny took, we all, and I think it was really nice that the staff kind of modelled that as well. So to help get away from the stigma, I actively go out to the food bank every week and we'll take at least one thing, just so that it's a whole community. There's no shame. And I think that's another thing. I think that's us now. I hope we didn't need a translator. Sometimes I get excited and talk really fast.
Have we got time for any questions?
Do we have time? Does anybody want to ask any questions, Stephen?
Has anybody got a burning question? While people are just thinking, because I know we'll have to finish the session in a minute, I love the invitation you gave us to text people in our contacts list. And I thought of 3 words I'm going to put in the chat now that I think sum up the 2 of you.
Oh, Stephen, you've gone on mute. Oh.
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Okay.
I was meant to send a message in the chat. So these are the 3 words that I think sum up the 2 of you. I hope they're shared by others. But what I think you've done during this session is demonstrated real innovation, real creativity in the way you've approached the systems in school, real care for students. And the word jumped out to me, and it's going to give me real inspiration for September, is that it's our job to champion every individual student in our school, and I can't think of two better champions for all students in the school, particularly you're disadvantaged. There's a comment from Nicholas saying a huge thanks, but is there anything burning people wanted to ask as a question? Because I'm conscious that we'll have to reconnect to the main session. There's a question from Lisa. How are the 5 key areas developed with EYFS children? I don't know if we can take that question.
Yeah, so it's used in a very, very similar way for early years pupils. Our 5 areas remain the same across the board, because as a school, that's what we felt were our priority areas, particularly with the focus on early communication skills. So it's all transferable.
And a lot of the social and emotional through communication, quite often that's all done in the early years, a massive emphasis on that anyway.
And then obviously when it's all triangulated at the end, it's just taken and assessed against the early learning goals, as opposed to what we would use in Key Stage 1 and 2, but it's all completely transferable, still just as valuable. And actually for our parental engagement in early years, it was really good.
Sorry, Jenny. Thank you both. Loads of lovely comments in the chat. Thanks for being so generous, not just with your time, but with ideas. And Alice has put a link back to the main session in the chat. So I'm going to invite people to give you a virtual round of applause, however we do that on Zoom. And thanks again. And I'll see people back in the main session.